Who do they say you killed?
Mother.
The murder of Elli Perkins on March 13, 2003 was never a whodunit. Within hours, police had a confession. His jeans drenched in blood, 28-year-old Jeremy Perkins had just stabbed his mother 77 times.
I screwed up.
Weeks later, in this recorded interview, Jeremy told a psychiatrist what was going through his mind.
My mom was, I thought she was out to get me. Like, sometimes she'd be totally normal and then she'd have that phase again.
Was Jeremy Perkins mentally ill? Is he mentally ill?
Oh, God, yes.
Dr. Brian Joseph was one of at least 8 psychiatrists who concluded that Jeremy suffered from schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia is a brain disease where one nerve cell doesn't seem to talk properly to another nerve cell. You begin to have psychological symptoms such as feeling people are out to get you when they're not, hearing voices when no one is there.
For Dr. Joseph and John Nucciarino, the attorney who represented Jeremy in his criminal proceeding, the real tragedy is that Jeremy Perkins never got proper psychiatric treatment.
His parents knew that he was extremely ill and experiencing hallucinations.
And did they call a psychiatrist?
No.
Elli and Don Perkins sincerely wanted to help their beloved son, Jeremy. But the Perkinses were Scientologists. These pro-Scientology materials declare that psychiatrists are not only useless, but evil. Their medications, nothing but poisons.
These drugs are very dangerous. They're mind-altering, antipsychotic drugs.
Most of us know about Scientology from the celebrities in the church.
Hey, how are you?
Like John Travolta, and of course, Tom Cruise. Those Hollywood stars are the most visible members of a church which today claims 10 million members worldwide. Scientology says its mission is spiritual betterment, philanthropy, and advancing human rights. As for the Perkins case, the church says that Elli's murder had nothing to do with her faith. But sources close to the case and these previously sealed court records tell a much different story, a story the Church of Scientology doesn't want you to hear.
There was so much love in that family, and they expressed it a lot, too.
Gretchen Clark, a former Scientologist, knew Elli and her family back in the 1970s.
She was so alive, and she got into everything with a passion.
Elli, an artist, had been raised Jewish. Dawn, a contractor, had a Christian background.
I called her Elle. To me, she was Elle.
One of Elli's best friends, Dawn, who asked us not to show her face, says Elli was searching for spiritual answers.
Sort of knowing that she had a purpose, but not knowing what it was.
We're not certain exactly how Elli was introduced to Scientology, but today the church often recruits new members with a free personality test or stress test. As we saw with our hidden cameras at this booth in New York City,
Be comfortable with that?
church members use this device called an e-meter to determine what's troubling you.
We're going to watch the needle together. You just think.
The e-meter measures the body's resistance to electrical current. The church is required by law to affix a label to each machine stating that it serves no medical purpose.
What was that?
They'll say, oh, look, the e-meter moved. Well, this means you're stressed. Come on in and we'll help you out.
Rich Dunning knows about the e-meter. He's a former deputy director of the Buffalo Church of Scientology, where he met the Perkins family. Is it a real device?
Scientologists believe that it is.
Do you believe it is?
No.
After our stress test, we got a sales pitch for this book.
You ready, Dianetics?
Dianetics, published in 1950, was written by Scientology's founder, a prolific science fiction writer named L. Ron Hubbard.
The aim and goal of Scientology is to take an individual and put them in a position where they can confront their own problems and solve their own problems.
For Scientologists,
Hubbard's word is scripture. If Hubbard said it, then it is by definition true, and they have to believe it.
Dr. Stephen Kent.
Stephen Kent is a professor of sociology at the University of Alberta. He's considered one of the foremost experts on Scientology.
Aspects of Scientology's war.
But inside the church, he's considered an anti-religious extremist who's been paid to testify against the church in court.
When Scientology was first started, was it a religion?
Oh, no. The title of the Dianetics book is very clear. Dianetics, the modern science of mental health.
Fear. In Dianetics, Hubbard claims each person's mind is imprisoned by traumas we've experienced in our past.
Where do these things come from?
The way to break free is by undergoing an intense counseling process called auditing, much of it while attached to the e-meter.
Every session will be perfect.
The goal is to attain an enlightened state, which Hubbard called clear.
Clear involved claims about getting rid of negative experience that one's had in this life that hold one back.
The auditing process that you went through, how did it make you feel?
It was good. You became very euphoric.
Ellie's experience was so positive that she joined the church. Soon, she married another member, Don Perkins.
For her, it seemed to give her a lot of calmness and peace and happiness.
But from the start, Hubbard's methods were ridiculed by the medical establishment. One journal called Dianetics a new system of quackery.
In Hubbard's reaction to the generally negative response, he became increasingly aggressive against psychiatry.
Hubbard decided to transform the modern science of Dianetics into a new religion called Scientology. And by the early 1970s, when Elli Perkins joined the church, Hubbard's hostility toward psychiatry had intensified.
Psychoanalysis, they lay back. Don't associate Scientology with such people.
Hubbard wrote a policy in 1968 called The War. In this letter called The War, he announced that the purpose of Scientology had become the eradication of psychiatry.
I applaud L. Ron Hubbard because he was the person who identified the abuses of psychiatry.
The church referred us to Scientologist Jan Eastgate, president of a Scientology-founded group called the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, dedicated to exposing psychiatric abuses.
Psychiatry as a profession, as an ideology, doesn't work.
How would you describe antipsychotic and psychotropic drugs?
Barbaric, inhumane, should never be used. We're totally opposed to any form of psychiatry.
To become a Scientologist means that one learns that psychiatry is a cosmic devil that is causing mischief and confusion, crime in the world.
Do you believe that psychiatrists are evil?
I think there are a lot of psychiatrists that are evil.
Did Elli believe that? Did she believe that psychiatry was an evil?
Yeah.
Strongly believed?
Yeah.
For many families in upstate New York, this annual Renaissance Fair is a weekend of 16th century summer fun. For Elli Perkins, it was also a chance to sell her handmade glass art.
You just saw glass hanging everywhere.
Fellow artist Cookie Schoonmaker Frenzik says she was there every year.
It was just like a rainbow, just walking in a rainbow.
Cookie has warm memories of Elli, her husband Don, and their kids Jeremy and Danielle, who were raised from birth as Scientologists.
They were just a beautiful little family.
Don and Elli spent much of their free time taking special Scientology courses, which help members advance in the church.
Do these courses cost money?
These courses do cost money. They can go from a few $1,000s to, in some cases, $10,000 or so.
In 1979, Dawn and Elli achieved the state of spiritual advancement in the church called clear. Elli learned to use the e-meter and became a respected auditor herself. In the 80s, the family briefly moved to California, where Elli had the privilege of working at one of the church's most prestigious facilities, the Celebrity Center in Los Angeles.
She said that she had met several celebrities like John Travolta and, a couple of other people. Al said that she did some counseling there. She said a lot of what she did was very confidential.
From the early years of the church, founder L. Ron Hubbard made it official policy to recruit celebrities.
The hope is that the person will attribute, some would say misattribute, their success to the Scientology courses.
I was a high-level executive at Celebrity Center, and we would go out and target certain celebrities.
Lawrence Wollersheim spent 11 years in the church and is now one of its most fierce and persistent critics. Like Elli Perkins, he climbed to higher states beyond clear, known in the church as operating Thetan, or OT levels. A Thetan is Scientology's equivalent of the spirit. Advanced members are taught that these Thetans were originally brought to Earth by a space alien named Xenu, where he exploded them in volcanoes.
I know this story sounds crazy, but Scientologists believe it to the death. It's what the aliens did that are really screwing your life up. That's what the secret levels of Scientology are all about.
Professor Stephen Kent says Scientologists are told that at the higher OT levels, members receive special powers.
Ability to control matter, energy, space, and time, to be free from serious illness, to be exempt from tragedies, and so on.
Wollersheim claims that these secret upper-level teachings pushed him over the edge.
At the OT3 level initiation, you discover that you're not one person. You're hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even 1 million aliens, and they're fighting for control of the body. You no longer know who you are anymore. I went completely nuts.
Did you end up getting psychiatric help?
Eventually I did.
Wollersheim sued the church. A California court found he had a bipolar personality and that the church coerced Wollersheim into continuing auditing, although his sanity was repeatedly threatened by this practice. After decades of appeals and countersuits, the church paid $8.6 million to end the case.
Scientology, they are the worst example of mind control in a religious setting that has ever existed.
The church calls Wollersheim a liar and a fraud and claims the vast majority of its members are happy and fulfilled.
So we can take you to OT.
Members like the Perkinses.
She just said that it offered so many answers and it had allowed her to build a wonderful life with Don and the kids.
By the late 80s, the family was back in Buffalo. Jeremy eventually attended the respected Williamsville North High School.
That's north.
Trey Johnson, a close friend and classmate, remembers him fondly.
He was quiet. I mean, nice kid, do anything for you.
I thought Jeremy Perkins was very weird.
Gabrielle Carlson had a different impression.
You know, he didn't seem like he could interact with anybody.
Gabrielle has always been suspicious of Scientology, but her brother Jeff joined the Buffalo Church. In 1996, he married Danielle Perkins, Jeremy's sister.
And I remember Jeremy he seemed to be happy for Danielle and for Jeff.
Jeremy's behavior had not yet become a problem for the church, but its handling of another member's mental health at Scientology's spiritual headquarters in Clearwater, Florida, would soon erupt in crisis. 36-year-old Lisa McPherson had died after spending 17 days undergoing Scientology's treatment for a nervous breakdown.
Isolate them, don't speak to them, put them in a quiet environment.
Autopsy photos showed Lisa's body emaciated, scratched, and bruised. Investigators discovered she'd been physically restrained.
They were trying to force feed her food and water. They were giving her different combinations of Scientology vitamins and so on.
They let her die. They watched her die.
Lisa's aunt, Del Liebrick, brought a civil suit against the church, in which Kent was a paid plaintiff's expert. The church settled that case without admitting wrongdoing, insisting that Lisa's death was triggered by an injury from a recent traffic accident.
I'm angry at what they did. I'm upset that her life was cut short by not getting care.
Years after her death, Lisa was still making headlines in Florida. By now, Scientologists in Buffalo were starting to wonder if they had a problem of their own.
Hey, Jeremy.
Ever since he was a teenager, Jeremy Perkins' dream was to be a rock drummer.
That's probably his only release.
That was his one passion.
Pretty much.
Regan Warling was close friends with Jeremy through the late 90s and the guitar player in their heavy metal band, The 10th Plague. Warling says Jeremy was serious about his music and his religion.
He did everything based on the church.
I always liked Scientology, but I think I spent too much time there. I was forced into it too much.
Jeremy was living at home, working for his father's contracting business and helping his mother with her glass painting. He was clearly functional, but Warling says he was definitely strange.
When he was like 24, he had told me that he heard voices, and that he told his father that he heard voices, and that his father told him to tell the voices to be quiet.
Instead of sending Jeremy to a psychiatrist, the Perkins family sent him to California to join an elite group within Scientology known as the Sea Org.
In the late 1960s, when Hubbard was running into difficulties with governments around the world, he established a small fleet of ships on the ocean, and these were called the Sea Organization, or Sea Org. Hubbard condemns...
Scientology expert Stephen Kent says that today the Sea Org is back on shore, its membership a sort of priesthood within the church.
When they joined Sea Org, they signed a billion-year contract, although there are...
Did you say billion?
A billion is in B. Yes, billion-year contract.
Jeremy's billion-year contract didn't last 1 year.
He got rejected for a reason which I'm unaware of.
The abrupt termination of Jeremy's Sea Org contract may have been tied to what former Scientologist Rich Dunning saw for himself in 2001. Jeremy's behavior was growing increasingly bizarre.
Just that look in his eye that you knew that something was not right with him.
48 Hours has obtained these court-ordered psychiatric evaluations of Jeremy, which were written after the murder of his mother in 2003. They indicate that Jeremy was showing symptoms of schizophrenia as early as 2001. But the Perkins family has long maintained that their son's condition was somehow triggered by an accident, which occurred in 2002, while Jeremy was working on his father's truck.
Well, that's nonsense, of course.
Psychiatrist Brian Joseph treated Jeremy after his arrest.
People often think that if they bump their head because your brain is in your head, then your brain is somehow affected, and that causes mental illness.
I hit my head coming out from underneath the truck. I hit my head on the door.
A bump on the head can cause a concussion. It does not cause schizophrenia.
Jeremy's parents took him for a CAT scan on 2 separate occasions. No abnormalities were ever found.
Of the numerous doctors that examined Jeremy, none ever thought that there was any significance with regard to the bumping of the head.
Jeremy's defense attorney, John Nucciarino, says his client continued to decline over the summer of 2002.
The illness took over to an extent where his father noticed it in his work and had to relieve Jeremy of his employment.
He had to fire his own son.
He did.
Jeremy was even banned from taking Scientology courses.
The church did know that he was a troubled individual. That's why they put him PTS, which is a potential trouble source, which is basically a label saying that you're sick and, you know, you need to get help before you become active again.
Jeremy was now suffering from serious hallucinations and delusions. But Elli frustrated her own doctor when she resisted advice to take Jeremy to a psychiatrist. The family did fill a prescription for the sleeping pill Sonata, but days later, things had only gotten worse.
We got the call about 6:25, 6:30 in the morning.
On August 14th, Officer Mark Martinelli caught Jeremy trespassing at the University of Buffalo. He'd been out wandering all night.
I would just walk out that night.
You walk at night?
Yeah, I was walking out that night.
Then things got rough.
They started fighting, punching, kicking.
Jeremy was arrested. A court-ordered psychiatric exam confirmed Martinelli's suspicions. Jeremy was schizophrenic. He was remanded to a local hospital, but he didn't stay there long.
His mother then convinced them to discharge Jeremy, I believe, to her, that she could take care of him.
Assistant Erie County District Attorney Ken Case prosecuted the Perkins murder.
Did officials believe, well, she's going to take him to a psychiatrist. She will get him on some sort of medication to control this problem?
That's my understanding, yes.
Did Elli intentionally mislead people?
The investigation revealed to us that she felt very strongly against further psychiatric treatment.
Jeremy was reportedly seen by a neurologist at this hospital who also recommended antipsychotic medication.
And what was the family's response?
They didn't want that.
Because?
That would have been against their belief.
Why would you put somebody like him in the hands of psychiatry that admits it doesn't know how to actually solve the problem, that its only solution is to drug the person?
Scientologist Jen Eastgate, whose organization investigates psychiatric abuse, aligns herself with other critics of institutional psychiatry, like Professor Jeffrey Shaler of American University, who say schizophrenia shouldn't even be called a disease.
There is no disease that Jeremy had called schizophrenia. This is an attempt by psychiatrists and other mental health professionals to explain why he did what he did.
Do you believe that drugs can treat mental illness?
Since there's no such thing as mental illness, there's no such thing as a medicine for mental illness. Now, can certain drugs change the way a person feels? Of course. But does that mean that the person needed that drug?
Jeremy did get a prescription for one other drug, lorazepam, a mild anti-anxiety medication with rare instances of violent side effects. But there is no evidence in the court records that he ever took it, and medical experts say that this is not an antipsychotic drug, which effectively treats paranoid schizophrenia.
This is the wrong drug for the wrong condition.
In a letter to CBS News, an attorney for Don Perkins claimed that Jeremy's parents repeatedly took Jeremy to both physicians and mental health practitioners, including a psychiatrist, who always released him to their care as not dangerous to himself or others. Jeremy was prescribed and took psychotropic medications to no avail, so the entire premise of our story is false. But the court records repeatedly state that Jeremy did not receive formal psychiatric treatment, and his father refused to provide further documentation of his claims.
Clearly, there was some professional psychiatric care needed that didn't occur.
Whatever else they considered that summer, for the next 6 months, the Perkinses desperately pursued a cure for their son while abiding by the principles of their faith. Battlefield Earth, a popular movie among Scientologists based on an L. Ron Hubbard science fiction novel, stars John Travolta as an evil alien cyclo enslaving the human race.
This is a stage 3 alert.
But prosecutor Ken Case says Jeremy Perkins came to believe that something like that movie was actually happening in his bedroom.
He was sleeping in a chair outside of his parents' bedroom because he thought aliens were in his bedroom.
In the fall of 2002, the Perkinses drove their 27-year-old son to Dr. Conrad Malfair, a Scientologist and osteopath in Pennsylvania who promotes natural, drug-free healing methods.
They had to physically, forcibly drag him in there. He didn't appreciate the treatment.
Defense attorney John Nucciarino says Malfair's clinic had an unusual explanation for Jeremy's symptoms.
They conclude that he was suffering from certain digestive problems, that he had certain chemical toxins in his body, and he needed to be purged of it, and he needed to be energized through vitamin therapy.
Is vitamin therapy for this profound mental illness a treatment?
No, it's nonsense.
Nonsense.
Yes, nonsense.
Dr. Malfair declined to be interviewed for this report. Don Perkins' lawyer wrote CBS News explaining that Don and Elli were concerned about the documented dangers of pharmaceutical substances. The church also provided research highlighting violent side effects of various psychotropic medications. But medical experts, including Dr. Joseph, say those side effects are rare and that scientific literature actually shows a decrease in violent behavior when schizophrenics take antipsychotic drugs.
We have a lot of treatments for people who are schizophrenic. We can make them better. Unfortunately, we can't make them well. But a lot of the more difficult symptoms can be quieted.
Still, Elli was desperate for a natural cure. She began feeding Jeremy more than a dozen vitamins and other supplements every day.
Do you believe that vitamins can treat or cure mental illness?
You know, vitamins and minerals and so forth are one aspect of getting the body healthy so that you're, healthy body, healthy mind. But that's one option amongst many, many different things.
The vitamins did not improve Jeremy's condition. In fact, their only noticeable effect was to make Jeremy suspicious of his mother.
I didn't know what the vitamins were for.
What concerns or thoughts did you have about something bad with the vitamins?
What concerns? Just that maybe she's trying to poison me or something.
Life inside the Perkins home was growing tense. Jeremy was getting aggressive, and Elli was getting worried.
As an indication of the fact that she knew he was ill, she had usually kept the knives in the house kept away, out of sight.
Elli explained the situation to this man, a self-taught natural healer named Albert Brown.
She talked to me about 2 incidences that were physical. There was some pushing, there was some struggling.
Brown is not a Scientologist or a doctor, but he says he's helped people overcome mental problems with regimens of meditation and one-on-one counseling.
Did Elli ever say to you, I will not give my son antipsychotic drugs?
She did tell me that she was not intending to give him any drugs, and that she would like to explore anything that doesn't include that.
In February 2003, Elli and Jeremy visited the country house where Brown did his counseling. Brown asked Jeremy an important question.
And I said, do you think you have any problems? And he was quiet, and then he looked me in the eye again and he said, sometimes I think I'm Jesus Christ.
Wasn't it your responsibility, since you're not licensed to treat anyone, to say, this is above my pay grade, you need to get him to a psychiatrist?
If I really believed that, I would say that. But I have dealt with that exact situation at that same level and have done it very successfully.
It was decided that Jeremy would come to stay at Brown's house next month.
She seemed to think that was going to be fine. And he seemed to think that was going to be fine.
But days before the move, Elli was troubled by Jeremy's behavior. She called her son-in-law, Jeff Carlson, now the executive director of the Buffalo Church of Scientology.
His solution was for Elli to give Jeremy busy work to do, which could have been anything between yard work to housework.
Jeff's sister Gabrielle and his deputy director Rich Dunning both found out about the conversation.
But the point was to occupy his mind with something else.
The church's solution was just to make him clean and get him tired so he can go to sleep.
The day before she was killed, Elli spoke with her friend, Dawn.
It seemed like she was stressed because nothing that she was trying was working.
On the morning of March 13th, 2003, Jeremy was told to pack for his trip to Albert Brown's.
His parents tell him that he is leaving, that he's going to leave the safety and security of the only security that he knows, his home.
Don Perkins went to work, but returned briefly and settled an argument between Jeremy and Elli. After he left, Elli demanded that Jeremy take a shower. She was on the phone with a friend when the attack began.
I held the knife in my right hand behind my back, and she hung up the phone.
Dr. Joseph read Jeremy's statement to the police.
I tried to slit my wrists after the shower, but I wouldn't die, so I decided to do my mom instead. She was screaming, "No, Jeremy, don't." I stabbed her about 4 to 5 times before she fell down. I knew she was a goner. I believe that I have lived different lives for the past 1,000 years and wished I was in another life now.
I was listening to the radio in my car, and I heard about a murder in a home, and then the last name came up, and I just started crying.
Police say Mrs. Perkins was stabbed in the chest.
The news report stated it was an artist who was killed by her son. So I knew it was Jeremy.
And what was the church's reaction to all of this?
At the time, it was a panic.
Rich Dunning says high-ranking church officials flew into town and told everyone to stay quiet.
Was there a cover-up?
Yes, there was.
And the purpose of the cover-up was what?
To distance the church as far as away they could from Jeremy Perkins.
Dunning says the murder was a PR nightmare for the church for 2 reasons. First, it exposed the danger of Scientology's ban on psychiatry. But equally important, it punctured the church's promise that by reaching higher OT levels, true believers achieved special powers.
Because, you know, an OT is a super being. Nothing bad should happen to an OT.
They're protected. They're told they're protected. Things like this don't happen.
Gabrielle Carlson hoped the shock of the tragedy would finally force her brother to question the church.
And I love him very much, and I will always love him very much.
Her hopes were in vain.
Absolutely nothing. Nothing will change. It's kind of brushed over. Hush, hush. Move on. Don't talk about it.
But the Perkins family tragedy could not simply be brushed over. Now, Jeremy was facing the charge of murdering his mother. Eight months after the murder of Elli Perkins, the Church of Scientology threw a gala opening for its new building in Buffalo. Jeremy Perkins was unable to attend the party. He was behind the barbed wire at the Rochester Psychiatric Center.
I didn't think it was wrong for why they did it.
Why not?
Because I thought she was evil at the time.
Within days of his arrest, Jeremy was put on antipsychotic medication. Dr. Joseph says the drugs did not cure Jeremy, but at least they stabilized him.
The change was dramatic, it was remarkable, and I firmly believe, as his doctor in those days, had he received psychotropic medication, perhaps been in a mental hospital for a period of time, I don't think this would have happened.
That's just a hackneyed response by psychiatrists. It's typical of what they will say, because there is no evidence that a psychotropic drug is going to prevent an act of violence.
Scientologist Jan Eastgate believes all psychiatrists are corrupted by connections to the pharmaceutical industry. But curiously, John Nucciarino says Jeremy has his own opinion.
Jeremy himself told me that he firmly believes that had he been taking these medications, that it would not have happened.
Ken Case's prosecution of Jeremy Perkins effectively ended when the state's own psychiatrist concluded that he was not responsible for the murder. The court sent Jeremy to the secure Rochester facility.
Have there been incidents at the institution? Has he been violent toward anyone?
There's been no such incidents. Jeremy is a perfect patient for the people that are there.
Jeremy has never blamed the church for what happened, but he has complained about Scientology's effect on his life.
I felt that I might have been pushed too much into that.
By who?
My parents.
How did they push you?
Because anytime there was a problem, they said that we can handle it in Scientology, which is good, but I lost because I tried to help out too much there when I could have been with my friends.
The Perkins tragedy did not seem to alter the church's position on psychiatry. In 2005, Tom Cruise made his now famous denunciation on national television.
Psychiatry is a pseudoscience. You don't know the history of psychiatry. I do.
Tom, stick to acting. Don't practice medicine without a license. It doesn't suit you.
What do you say to the millions of people who believe that they are benefiting from these drugs? People who may be watching this broadcast tonight.
You know, they need to get thoroughly informed. They're playing a game of Russian roulette with their life. And these drugs are very dangerous, and they need to be informed of all the side effects.
Don Perkins and his daughter Danielle remain devoted to Scientology. After John Nucciarino spoke with 48 Hours, Jeremy was paid a visit from a senior church staffer. Nucciarino was then dismissed and replaced by Richard Griffin, whose firm has worked for the Church of Scientology in the past. No one in the Perkins family agreed to our requests for on-camera interviews. The attorney for Don Perkins explained in a letter that Mr. Perkins was wary of our program because it had a pre-existing agenda in favor of psychiatric drugs. For everyone touched by the murder of Elli Perkins, there is a palpable sense of loss and regret.
It's just an unnecessary, tragic, horrific, violent crime that happened to a very decent woman.
Mrs. Perkins, why didn't you give us a chance? Please. It didn't have to be that way.
Both Gretchen and Dawn mourn the loss of their friend and worry what will become of the son she loved so dearly.
He has to live the rest of his life knowing what he did to a mother that he loved very much.
The sad truth is, Elli would have done anything for him. Al would have died for him. And she did.